Every so often, I find myself coming back to listen to this again. I have a memory stuck in my head of listening to this interview while I scraped shells off my friend's boat in the summertime. And then again yesterday, I found myself listening to this cleaning out the garage. It's just a conversation that you get lost in time with, like you're a passenger. The interview I'm referring to is this David Foster Wallace interview from 2003. There's something so appealing about it. It's imperfect and scruffy, with the shaking camera and the mix-up of the question scripts, as well as this raw, personal sincerity to it. You really feel it through the exchanges throughout with the filming crew, the zoomed-in camera, and the conversational style of the interview. It's just a really human interaction to difficult questions.
I'm sorry?
You're very reflective.
Well, these are hard questions.
Oh, yeah.
Particularly when it's about something you did like 7 years ago.
Okay. I just shoot the pictures.
Yeah. I would trade places with you at this moment.
And I think the sensitivity and perception of David Foster Wallace really strikes a chord. There's moments throughout where you feel like he's speaking just to you. He discerns and captures these delicate observations perfectly. And the interview serves itself now as this type of time capsule of lucid meanderings that make their way back to this idea of looking outside yourself beyond the materialist self-gratification and the individualist self-advancement of the age. The interview begins with the subject of humour and touches on topics such as sadness, education, and the singularity of reading as an experience. But it's the themes of individualism and materialism that really resonate. They seem to pervade the interview, and it's really no surprise. After all, these are topics that were really at the core of his work.
This is something very subtle and is delivered by a great many messages. In just conversationally, do you get what I'm talking about? I rather doubt that Europeans' idea of America is very different from this. I mean, this is one enormous engine and temple of self-gratification and self-advancement, and in some ways it works very, very well. In other ways, it doesn't work all that well, because at least for me, it seems as if there are whole other parts of me that need to worry about things larger than me, that don't get nourished in that system.
And do you think the Europeans know that? Do you think
from the Europeans I've talked to, yeah. I mean, it's when I get in arguments with Europeans, it's that their view of it is sort of exaggerated and simplistic. It's a very complicated thing. And full of paradoxes and ironies and all kinds of stuff. And
I just thought in this interview, the ideas of self-gratification and self-attainment, they were unveiled and discussed really candidly and well in his typical sensitive, discerning and acute style. The issue of self-gratification through materialism and pleasure is weighed up excellently by David.
Whatever the conditions of hopelessness you're talking about, at least in Infinite Jest, have to do, I think, with an American idea, and not a universal one, but one that I think kids get exposed to very early, that you are the most important, and what you want is the most important, and that your job in life is to gratify your own desires. That's a little crude to say it that way, but in fact it's something of the ideology here, and it's certainly the ideology that's perpetrated by television and advertising and entertainment, and the economy thrives on it.
But it manifests itself within us in near constant stimulation through entertainment and consumerism. This thing of gratifying every need all the time, to buy things or experiences to remain entertained. He describes it as becoming progressively hostile and in your face each year, and notes that a model of life in which you need to be constantly entertained is not a promising one.
I think one more example of the American economic and cultural systems that work very well in terms of selling people products and keeping the economy thriving, do not work as well when it comes to educating children or helping us help each other know how to live and to be happy. If that word means anything, clearly it means something different from whatever I want to do. I want to take this cup and throw it right now. I have every right to. I should. You know, I mean, that we've seen it. We see it with children. That's not happiness. That feeling of having to obey every impulse and gratify every desire it seems to me to be a strange kind of slavery. Nobody talks about it as such, though. It talks about freedom of choice, and you have the right to have things, and spend this much money and you can have this stuff. Again, saying it this way, it sounds to me very crude and very simple, but that's sort of the way.
His observations about self-attainment and the individualistic culture evident in the 90s and early 2000s have become a societal norm in today's digital age. The idea of congregation, community, and the good we can do for each other, this moral sense of being an adult, taking responsibility for yourself, but crucially also about your duties as a citizen and individual within the world, are dissipating.
One's reduced to talking, I think, about general terms like being grown up, or a term that's rarely used here anymore. And see, and now I feel embarrassment because I'm going to sound like my grandfather or something, but the word citizen. The idea of being a citizen would be to understand your country's history and the things about it that are good and not so good and how the system works, and taking the trouble to learn about candidates for political office, which means often reading stuff, which isn't fun. Sometimes it's boring.
And the decline of those concepts like citizenship and being grown up, and how we orientate ourselves in the world towards these things that are larger than us, is linked somehow to this loss of the idea of worshipping something greater than you. And I think the point he made, which is, it's reminiscent of something Carl Jung said, is that we all worship or have a religious impulse. And the myth that we worship nothing and give ourselves away to nothing simply sets us up to give ourselves away to something different, like pleasure, materialism, drugs, individual pursuits. You put in the word there. But I think it's so true, and it's something that you're not really aware of unless you really critically think about these things.
The root in English of addict is the Latin addicere, which means religious devotion. It was an attribute of beginning monks, I think. There's an element in the book in which various people are living out something that I think is true, which is that we all worship and we all have a religious impulse. We can choose to an extent what we worship, but the myth that we worship nothing and give ourselves away to nothing is simply sets us up to give ourselves away to something different.
And these things that we give ourselves away to now, it's like we know there's a limit to their depth and how much meaning we can possibly get from them. But then we go and distract ourselves from this awareness by these very same things.
This is the kind of paradox, I think, of what it is, of what it is to be a halfway intelligent American right now, and probably also a Western European, is that there are things we know are right and good and would be better for us to do, but constantly it's like, yeah, but it's so much funnier and nicer to go do something else, and who cares, and it's all bullshit anyway. And sorry about that.